screen, not knowing who's there at all. So this is particularly nice. So I'm in an attic in Frome, and actually, which is down near Bath. For those of you who don't know, just a bit south of Bath and quite near Bristol, market town of about 30,000. So here we are, and of course, it's also really nice in some ways, well, in lots of ways, to be able to do this. Because had Penny said, you know, will you come and talk to me tonight? I probably would have said, nah, I'm not coming all that way. So it's really nice to be able to do this, and thanks for asking. My plan, I'm glancing up at the clock, is to talk for not too long, but to basically tell you I don't know what it is. It's a sort of mixture of a bedtime story and a fairy tale. And then for us to have plenty of time to discuss that, which, given the numbers of you, we might well break up into rooms. So after I've spoken, we might break up into rooms for you to have a bit of a chat with smaller numbers, so that people have more chance of getting their voices heard, and then come back and share the things you think most pertinent. So there are a couple of bits of context I want to give to this before I start the story. The first is that I've been an environmentalist all my life. I had a garden 60 years ago, and my dad was the first professor of ecology. So that sort of thing has been in my life forever. And in the context of Frome, I've been here 35 years, and halfway into that time, so about 15 years ago, I started what became a transition town group. So at that point, Rob was starting transition towns in Totnes, much at the same time as we were starting what was called Sustainable Frome. But a few years later, would undoubtedly have been called Transition Town Frome, because it had very much the same aims as the transition town movement, and then adopted a lot of the same sort of territory. And that group still meets every first Thursday of the month, and has done ever since. And as some of you who will know, who've been involved with those early days of transition, one of the idea, or one of the thoughts of transition, there were a number of steps, and one of those steps was to go to your town council. And the other bit of context to this really is that that's what I did. I went to the town council, and what I met in that moment was a town council that wasn't that unordinary, if that makes sense. So it wasn't that surprising. Can I just get you to mute? Sorry, if you're not. Yeah, it would be great if you could mute, because there's a bit of feedback going on there. The second bit of context, is that there are 10,000 town and parish councils, and Frome, like you, is a town council, and most of them are singularly unambitious. So over half of the town councils in the country, or town and parish councils, don't have elections, and most of them have people who are, well, elderly white men. And speaking as an elderly white man, I can't really knock them, but they're far from representative, and many people doing a great job. And I would always say that it's the system rather than the individuals, but the system is clearly failing us. Town councils don't actually have to do anything other than have one meeting a year and look after allotments. So they're set up in a way which is very unambitious as well. So what you've got is a me with lots of environmental background and a lifetime in social justice, and a town in which a sudden realization that things could be better, really. So when I went to the town council, and this is me starting my story really, excuse me, I said to them, so tell me about your environmental policy. Tell me about peak oil and climate change and what you're going to do about it. And the answer was, we've got a park, and that's what we do. We look after the park. And I thought, oh, blimey, that's very uninspiring. And then talking to others in the pub, I found that actually there were a number of other people who'd come from different angles who'd also thought, this is a town council which is really not doing very much. It was elected along party lines. In our case, Lib Dems and Tories sort of basically shared power, although there'd been a brief spell of Labour power when Tony Blair got in. But basically, they just opposed each other in traditional Westminster fashion. And then what we saw is this group of 5 or 6 of us, I suppose. One of us had worked in the next level up, in the equivalent for you of the high peak, the district level. He'd worked at that level in a different council. So what he was saying was there's something called the Localism Act coming, and I can never remember his name. Cameron had said, we're going to take the power from the political elite and give it to the man and woman in the street. So he thought, hey, great, you know, there's going to be some real power coming down from Westminster. We'll have that. We also knew that austerity was one of their other plots. So there was going to be a huge reduction in the amount of money coming down from district and county. And so we felt that, you know, a lot of things were going to go. And if the town didn't do things, they weren't going to happen. And then thirdly, there was this problem of party politics. Because as I say, basically our politicians just argued with each other and did very little. So we as a group of people, it started off thinking, let's just go to a few meetings and stir things up and make this a bit more interesting. This is in the January before the May election in 2011. So 3 or 4 months before an election. And then gradually that merged into, should we, you know what, could we actually take power here, actually do something a bit more interesting? And we looked at what independents could do, because we were very keen not to have party politics, not to be a political party. So we looked at independence and the history of independence, and it wasn't very good, to be honest. Independents are mostly, particularly at higher levels of local government, they're mostly people who are so extreme they've been thrown out of their party. They're too far, you know, they're too far right for UKIP or whatever. So they've fallen out with the party, or they're single issue people. So they're effectively the anti-Tesco's party, or, you know, the anti-bypass party. And so they'd come together as effectively independents, but really around one issue. And then once that issue was solved, they all fell apart. So there was a very poor record of independents working well together. So what we did was we said, let's work out what our ethos is. Let's say this is how we as a group will behave, which we called our ways of working. So we formed our ways of working. And then we said, what we'll offer to the people is just that and loads of participation. So we said, we're going to run this thing differently. If you vote for us, we will work with you, the people, to work out what to do, genuinely. We won't just represent you, we'll work with you. So we'll turn the whole thing around, which is a fairly radically different way of doing things. It means you haven't got a manifesto. It means you're not knocking on the door and saying, this is what we'll do. All you're doing is saying, this is who I am, this is how I work, and I'll work with you to decide what to do. So I just want to make it go off on a slight detour for a couple of minutes, because although that might sound radical, in some ways it's not. It's a return, in my view, to something which there was before. I mean, we don't know how humankind first made its decisions when there were groups of people, living in wherever they were, in the deserts or whatever. But quite likely they were working some sort of consensual system, particularly in which women would have a much greater say because of the importance of the role of women within society. And that sort of system does survive in many sort of First Nations groups, and we've got much to learn from them. But the first really recorded democracy is obviously the Greeks, who invented the word. And there's something that's I think is really interesting about what the Greeks did. So I'm sure most of you know this, but what they were using was random selection for a lot of their decision making. So the whole of the population would be taken, or the whole of the male population. This is where it all falls down a bit, but put that aside for a second. So the whole of the male older population, and then they randomly selected people. And in many of their decision making things, so in Athens, they had a population, not a lot bigger than Frome's, but 40,000 people. 6,000 people would often be making decisions. And what they said was that if you have a voting system, if you devise a system in which you're voting people into a hierarchy to represent you, it will always lead to an oligarchy. It will always lead to the rich and the powerful holding the top of that pyramid, because they will be influenced in so many ways. So that random selection to them was the only way to do things and to broaden this. And that was what they defined as democracy. So I would kind of argue that we've never really had democracy in this country at all. Because what happened next after the Greeks was that the Romans took one look at the Greek system and said, yeah, okay, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to have voting. because we actually want the people with the power and the the people with the money and the power. We want us to be top of the tree and to stay there. And then, of course, we, other European so-called democracies took the Roman system, and then we refined it to introduce things like our first past the post system, which means that in Britain there's something like 20% of us voted for the current government, which is all powerful. So what we've arrived at is a complete farce, in my view, and which, crucially for us, if you like, as environmentalists and people who are involved in transition work as well, is a complete and utter disaster, not just for us, obviously, but for the whole of all, everything that lives, and those rich people, because what we've devised is a system which only looks after those people's interest, and they're using a model of growth and consumption and ownership of the few. So that's the end of my digression, but I wanted to put it in because, of course, it's a similar sort of pattern that we have at all levels of our system. By voting, because we're using a voting system, it was designed to get a certain group of people into power, and I think it's really important to recognise that in what I'm saying. And that's why what we were trying to do in Frome and trying to set up a system by which you change the role, so the people who are elected are not just your representatives, but are people whose role is to facilitate the greater engagement of the people. That's going back to something more like the Greek system. It's not sortition, and it's not, it doesn't complete the picture. It doesn't do the whole job, but it's a step in that direction. So after that not so brief diversion, I'll wind you back to that first election. So we've had those meetings, sort of 4 or 5 of us. We then had a meeting in the pub, and in another pub, to look for people who might stand. We have 17 councillors. So that was if you think you might want to be involved meeting. And we had a room which holds about 40 people, and about 80 people came. And we had too many people by the end of that meeting who wanted to stand, which is another key point. The political parties have about 2%. About 2% of the adult population is a member of a political party, which means they have a tiny pool from which to draw their candidates. So in Frome, that's probably around 300 people are members of the Lib Dems, the Tories, Labour, and the Greens. So that's a tiny number, whereas we've got 15,000 people who might want to be councillors. So you've got this massive advantage by being genuinely independent in that way. So we chose 17 candidates, and then offered a really light, different, open campaign. As I say, really just offering, this is how we're going to behave, and we'll do participation. And in that first election in 2011, we won 10 out of 17 seats. So there were still 7 people who represented parties, but they were split between the Tories and Lib Dems, and they didn't like each other more than they didn't like us. So they never formed any form of opposition, and they effectively dropped out of the picture, which was a great pity, actually. But anyway, that's another story. But as soon as we got in, we realised a crucial thing, which is that there are these things called standing orders, which those of you who are councillors will know, which are often cited as being the rules. They're not the rules. There are some bits of them which are rules, but the vast majority are guidance, which you can change. So you have to have some rules, for instance, because it's public money that you're spending. So you need to have an annual audit, that kind of thing, fair enough. And you have to have a meeting a year, but the vast majority of it turns out to be about the way that you behave, about the way that you interrelate with the people. And so we basically tore a lot of that up. And that first meeting, we suspended, we elected the mayor, the chair, which is something you needed to do in order to be able to run the meeting. And then we suspended the meeting. And we said, look, we're going to hold this for 2 weeks while we work out what to do. Because in that first meeting, what the standing orders will often tell you to do, or usually tell you to do, is to elect a load of people to a selection of committees. And at that point, no one knows what those committees do. They don't know what their you know, the criteria. You know, it's bonkers. You don't know who you are as a group. You don't know who you are as individuals and what your strengths are. You don't know where you fit within those committees, and you don't know if you need those committees really. So what we did was, as I say, stopped everything for a couple of weeks, and then came back and then got rid of all those committees. We had 9, I think, and then turned them into 2 committees. And that system has survived in Frome for the next 12 years and works really well. So then we launched a program which was largely, as I say, about going back to the people. We multiplied the amount of money going back to local groups by 10, so that the grants we multiplied by 10, so that about 25% of the money coming in from the tax went back out to the people. And in that, and also employed people to support community groups. And then somebody who we brought in, what's the word? We commissioned in to help with fundraising where it was required. And what this was about was trying to build a town, or to build a voluntary sector, which was much, much stronger in itself. And a lot of that too was about saying yes, not no. It was about when people came with ideas, the instinctive answer should be to say yes, and then to worry about how to achieve it. And of course you can't sometimes, but it's surprising how often you can with that approach. And then in particular, we changed the whole meeting structure, which in many ways I think was the most important thing we did. So that our meetings were really informal, and later on became just a room full of people. So you don't know who the councillors are at all until you get to vote. When, you know, when if I was voting, I'd hold up a bit of orange card which has my name on it. But that might be the first time you know that I'm a councillor. We're all dressed in our jeans and t-shirts, because actually a while ago we were all, you know, ordinary people in Frome. And one of the weirdest things that I think about this whole game is how becoming a councillor, and particularly becoming the mayor, suddenly becomes this whole, oh, Councillor Macfadyen, oh, Your Honour. And it's like, hang on a minute, we were picking up our children at the school gate yesterday. Where did all this come from? You know, and there's something very odd which percolates upwards through the, if you can percolate upwards, through the system. You know, in a higher up you get, so that by the time you get to an MP, they're virtually deities, which is completely bonkers in that, you know, it just shouldn't be like that. So we changed the formality enormously. And we put in place a very early neighbourhood plan, which was to try and bring, one of the things of trying to bring together people's ideas. Neighbourhood plans were part of localism, the Localism Act, which is meant to give a lot more power to this level. And I would say, in my view, that was pretty much a farce. We, despite getting in there early and having a very good and strong neighbourhood plan, the power and the money all stayed at much higher levels. So it's made very little difference. We borrowed a lot and we spent a lot, and we multiplied the precept, the amount of local tax, a lot. And our experience of doing that was that it was no problem at all, because people were engaged, and that people were, you know, very much on board with that because they knew what was happening. And although a 25% increase in tax sounds like a lot when I say it like that, when it's actually a couple of quid a month, it's not so much. And when you know that's going to pay for something like a resilience officer, which we employed, you might be much happier. And the resilience officer is a good example of what we did. So we employed a fantastic woman who has looked after a whole raft of things around climate change and those issues, and doing what I think is often missing, and is really the key reason of why I think this process is so important. What she brought was capacity to ideas. So as a transition town group, we often had ideas, but then we'd kind of run out of steam or run out of energy, or we had other jobs. So we didn't have the time to do things. So that what we changed to was a situation where somebody within the Sustainable Frome, the transition group, had heard about a community fridge. Talked about that to Anna, who's the woman at the council, and then Anna could make, you know, get the money and help that to happen and facilitate that, because she had the time and the money to get that started. Community fridge, as an example, has been fantastically successful and replicated in 90 places all over Britain. But having that capacity in the town council can make a huge difference. But actually, so, you know, that post is also a really good example of where spending money, you know, when people understand what it's for, is not, in my experience and the experience of many others, a big deal. And mentioning many others is a timely thing, because I wrote about, where are we now? About halfway through that first period of 2011 to 2015, I wrote Flatpack Democracy, which is a guide to taking power. And to my complete astonishment, that sold about 4,000 copies, not just in Britain, and led to quite a few councils who've done something similar, in often different models and different ideas and different ways of working, which is perfect, because that's exactly what I was offering, really. I was trying to offer inspiration and to encourage people to do this where they hadn't, and give some fairly basic ideas as to how they might go about this, some essential things I felt they needed to do. And so that's led to a number of other councils. And then last year I wrote Flatpack 2, which is kind of builds on that and takes lots of learning from those other councils, and also lists a lot of the things that Frome has done to try and inspire people and others to go down this same route. Because as I say, I think it's really important. And from my personal opinion, which was really an environmental agenda, it's enabled us as Frome to do far, far more than we possibly could have done as a transition town movement alone. So it's really that combination of the two, a benevolent, if you like, a compliant, a benevolent, whatever you want to call it, council, working with a really strong local community, has been incredibly important. And the other thing to mention in relation to that is that that's really come home with the pandemic, where the town council, of which I'm no longer a member, because I didn't stand in last May, has been able to work with local groups who've been fostered and catalysed and built up over the last few years. So that there's a group called Fair Frome, who took over all of what was needed in terms of making sure people were fed and looked after. Another group, whose name I've just forgotten, I'll remember in a moment, who look after, who work with people who are lonely and alone. So it became something which the town council, again, could support others without having to do it all itself, which has been hugely successful for us. And I think that's my main message, really, that this way of doing things is an opportunity to move on from where we were. And where we were, in a way, was all right, I think, pre-austerity, and at a time when parish and town councils didn't have much power and didn't do much. That was kind of all right. It was all right for the mayor to just wear his chain or his or her chain and do not very much, and have a twinning association and open things and that kind of stuff. But actually, if we thought austerity was bad, what I'm seeing now, and what I'm pretty certain is about to descend upon us, is the recession, which will make austerity look like a picnic, and therefore, if town councils and if communities are not sufficiently resilient, we're going to get really nobbled much, much harder. So that's why I think this sort of approach is so important, because a town council in itself, the 12 councillors who you have and New Mills can't possibly take on all these roles. They're probably all busy people doing their things anyway. But if they found ways to move out, to develop relationships, to build and to strengthen the town, then they might have much more chance of doing so. And I think the other thing I want to mention that is, and almost finally really, is that Frome's developed a whole network of people who are working around issues of loneliness. So the town council funded the NHS to employ somebody to set up what's become called Compassionate Frome, which is, as I say, a network of people within the town who know about or have access to the information about what all who all the organisations are, so they can link somebody with needs to those. But they can also work with the health centre, and because the health centre is socially prescribing. So if you go to the health centre with your stress problem, on the screen of the doctor will be the various drugs that they can give you, and the links that link you into paid staff and this bunch of volunteers, or this bunch, there's nearly 1,000 of them, this mass of volunteers, to link you into that whole network of community So it's all about rebuilding that community and ensuring that it's resilient again, to use that much overused word, you know, to what it might get hit at. And that's been incredibly influential. And actually, the main thing which it's done in Frome is to hugely reduce the number of people who come back from hospital, come home from hospital, and then don't survive. You know, not they live, but they're back in hospital in no time. They're referred back to hospital very quickly, because in the period they were away, all sorts of their you know, the things which helped them to live have collapsed. Whoever was looking after them, whoever was ordering things, the help they need doesn't exist. And Frome Health Centre has been saving millions of pounds a year in the number of people who are not going back to hospital, or rather it's been saving the NHS. And you can show that very easily, because while Somerset's costs of that happening were going up by 17%, Frome's have gone down by 25%. And there's nothing else that can be, you know, that can possibly have done that. So this policy really of building a town and placing the council as one of the actors within that town has proven to be really successful. And of course, another of those actors was and remains the transition town movement. And I'm now involved in a group of people working together to try and help those who want to stand in a similar way in 2021 to do so, because the 2020 elections have been cancelled, which means there are going to be a lot more parish and town elections come in May 2021. So there's a lot more. There's a bunch of us working together to try and identify how best we can support people to work in this way. And it's not anti-party in the sense that I don't really care. I'm not bothered about whether somebody is a member of a political party. And there were members of political parties within the group of us in Frome. I missed a bit, which is in the second election, all 17 of us were elected. And then in the 2019 election, all 17 were elected again. So this model has worked. You know, the good people of Frome seem to feel that it works for Frome. But there are members of political parties within that group. All they're doing is they're saying, we're going to put that baggage, as I see it, we're going to put that baggage away for these 4 years. We won't bring it to meetings. We won't be led by the ideology of being whatever it is, of being a Green or being a Tory or whatever. We'll be led by what is best for Frome, and this list of, or this agreement as to how we'll work, you know, together for the best of the town. So that, in rather a speedy ramble, is what I had to say. I mean, essentially, it's a story of one place. And I mean, I used to feel when I was first asked to write Flatpack, I said, why? You know, why? What's the point? Why? You know, why do I? It's not that difficult. Why is anybody going to be interested in this? And what I was persuaded was that, no, what's interesting is that you've done it, and whatever you've achieved, it just shows that it can be done. And I think I recognise that that's true. So hopefully, you know, in sharing that with you tonight, I do a bit of that, of saying, you know, this is something which is not that difficult to do actually in many places, because most towns don't even have an election, and many places don't have a full quota of people standing. And as I say, a well orchestrated bunch of individuals who actually care about their town, you know, with good connections, can do a lot very quickly and really make things happen. And it's my belief that we're going to need to, as never before. So that's what I have to say. I can't hear you, which is great.
Really?
But I can see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's excellent. I'm really interested to hear your perspective on that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to move to the gallery view, and I'll open it up to anybody that has a question. If you could just unmute yourself, that would be great. Anybody? Oh, Amy?
Hello. I wanted to know, what would you say were the main kind of conflicts or stumbling points that you encountered on this journey?
So amongst us, or with other groups and individuals?
I guess, well, because you said at the beginning that the system is failing us, and so I guess the system was, I guess, yeah, in terms of the actual system itself, the people who are already working there, maybe your other councillors, what were the biggest obstacles to getting to where the town is now?
Yeah. So for me, a lot of that is the nonsensicalness, if that's a word, of party politics. So to give you an example, one of the first things that we wanted to do, we realised if we were quick, we could get a load of photovoltaics onto a building which the town owns and get the full feed-in tariff. You know, so it would be a really good thing to do. And we needed to borrow about 20 grand to do that. And borrowing money as a town council is both easy and cheap. Anyway, so it's like we presented to the town council, look, if we borrow this, we'll have paid it off in 5 or 6 years, and it will then go on, as long as the sun shines reasonably, to make a couple of £100,000 quid of tax-free money for the town, never mind all the carbon it saves. And the Tories voted against. And they voted against because they were doing, we're doing austerity. We can't borrow and spend. You know, we need to be getting our books in order. We need to be not heading down this route. And it's kind of going, but let me run this past you again. You know, we're going to borrow this money. Here's what happens. It'll save us all this. But they go, no. And and we met it worse in a sense at the next level up, at the district level, which was highly politicized. And actually, in our case, again, a Tory, a Conservative cabinet and a Conservative majority. And they really didn't understand what we were about and really didn't like us at all. And we made a bad mistake in retrospect, I think, which was to go to war with them. We basically took the piss out of them mercilessly. And then it all went a bit wrong because we realized that they had planning. I mean, they had all this power over us, which we kind of hadn't really taken into account, I don't think, when we started having fun with them. You know, so again, it was purely about the politics. It was purely about the party politics. We were not them, and therefore for them, lose was better than win. If you see what I mean. So although Frome is 25% of the population of that district, they would still rather see Frome fall over and fail to do stuff than a group of people who were not Tories achieve anything. So for me, it's this muddling in of party politics into this level of local government, which has been one of the biggest stumbling blocks and still is. Not quite so badly for Frome and the regime or whatever, the group who I'm not part of actually. But yeah, that will be my answer.
Thank you. Matt, can I ask you one follow-up question?
Sure.
I think there was either a radio show or a podcast that I listened to with you on recently. I can't remember which it was, but I think you mentioned that the group had used facilitators to kind of build a strong initial relationship with the existing sort of, I don't know, staff members or the other councillors. Can you give any detail as to what that looked like and how you arranged that?
Yeah, so we did that right from the beginning. So that first meeting in the pub, not the one of only 5 of us, the first meeting with a big meeting, and then all of the meetings up to being elected, and then throughout the rest of the time, particularly at key moments, we used a professional facilitator, outside facilitator who had no, who wasn't one of us, but was someone who understood what we were trying to do and was very sympathetic of what we were doing. So this is somebody within the town who said, "I'm really happy to, I'd really like to support you in whatever ways I can do, and the best way that I can do that is to provide this service for you, if you like." So yeah, we've used them all the way through, and I think it's essential. Because otherwise you're likely to end up with a sort of de facto leader, if that makes any sense. So even right from that very first meeting, you're likely to end up with someone who's, will take the position of chair, will sort of start taking it over, and then everyone else doesn't bother to get involved because they're taking over. But a skilled person who can really ensure that people are being listened to, and of course, particularly ensure that the quieter voices are being heard, is really, I think, that's one of my essentials and would remain one of my essentials.
Thank you.
Jill, did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I'm sorry to emphasize conflict, Peter. I've enjoyed this so much, and I actually did hear your podcast radio talk. So this is helping an old lady remember and understand. Really interesting. It's a little bit like where what we're talking about, Amy is talking about, to come in as a bunch of mere citizens, mere amateurs, and say, oh, come on, we can do this properly. You know, you old fogies have been doing it wrong for decades. And I'm imagining the little bit that I know of New Mills Town Council, and I can see how in a very small town with this, everybody, you know, face to face, everybody knows everybody and goes to the same co-op and so on. That it's the very initial meeting you're describing, where you come in and you say, right, that's it, you know, we're going to stop now and we're going to turn the handle and effect a revolution. Did you still have people from the previous council present, or had they all been non-elected? Because it's that power balance and the personal conflict, which in a small town like ours, as you probably know, never ever goes away. The resentment and the bitching never goes away. How did you deal with that at the very beginning?
So there were 7 of the original councillors at the very beginning. So only 10 out of 17 of us got in. We put up 17 candidates. 7 of them didn't get in. Interestingly, of that 7, 4 were people who had been councillors previously, which led me later to sort of, when people are talking about this as to who they choose as candidates, not only that, but I've come to feel that often it's not helpful having old, you know, people who within your group who are old councillors, because they never really lose their you know, who they were. But that's not what you were asking about. I regret it. I regret the extent now that that animosity was definitely there, and I didn't realise at the time. The campaign had been pretty, you know, nasty at some points, with a lot of very personal stuff from them, which we were very, very careful to ignore. So we never answered letters or tweets or Facebook in any way other than that was positive. So we had a sort of ruthless rule of never going down this route. But it didn't stop that sort of pouring in, I suppose. And some of that was quite hurtful, particularly personal stuff to some people. So when we were elected, we tried to be friendly and so on, but I hadn't realised the extent to which it had been their whole life. You know,
yes.
that some of them were married, some of them were godparents of their other people's children. It was their social life, it was their everything life. After their endless meetings, after their endless committees, they all went to the pub together. You know, so and I may be exaggerating a bit, but it was very, very important. And so when that went wrong, we basically just ignored them and decided, well, so we're going to do our own thing then. And that was quite hurtful to many of them. And so what they did gradually was, as I mentioned, they sort of just drifted off. I mean, they just kind of stopped coming and stopped engaging. And so as a town, we lost 7 councillors, effectively. And some of those people had a long history of engagement and of course had a history of knowledge about why a decision had been made. So we lost that, which I regret. I don't know what you do about that, and no, otherwise. And there are a number of towns where exactly that's happened. But I'm afraid it's simply not a reason. I mean, just because a small group of people want to have a personal, you know, social club at the expense of the good members of the town, I'm not sure that's a reason to allow them to have that, especially as it's public money and decisions which they're making, which affect us and, you know, us all. So we should have gone to greater lengths to try and include people. And as I say, if we'd recognized how much hurt our victory, you know, caused, I think we could have been much more careful about that.
Thank you very much.
Right. I'm going to put the, you mentioned this, it was called the Spark that radio program. I'll stick it in the chat. Yeah. So it's a slightly different version of what I've said now because it was for Radio 4.
Thanks. Anybody else got their hands up? Like to ask a question of Peter, please. No, that's you. You just put something in the chat, haven't you, Peter? That wasn't. Well, while you're thinking, I might ask a question as well. So you said Flatpack Democracy 2 is looking more at how what you talked about in the first book has been used in different communities around the country. How varied have the experiences been, and have you got any specific advice for a town like New Mills of a similar sort of size and a number of councillors, based on either your experiences in Frome or from other towns around the country?
So they have been very varied. I mean, and some have been, in many ways, more impactful than Frome. There's some really interesting ones, and very different tactics, in the sense that some people have gone for a very long process of getting elected. The best example I can think of is Portishead, just south of Bristol, who started about 18 months before the election. One of the things that you can do is you can demand a town meeting. I think I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. So, and it's only something, it's a little known thing, and it's very annoying for town clerks and councils, because it's something like only 7, I need to check this, but if 7 parishioners demand a town meeting, they can have it. It hasn't got any power, but the town council has to facilitate it. If the mayor is present, they have to chair it, but if the mayor isn't present, they don't have to. Anyway, they called a town meeting to discuss their town council and what it was and wasn't doing. And I can't remember, 150 people turned up, a lot of people turned up. They then did something else which they have the right to do, which is to demand a poll on a particular issue, so you can put forward a question. So they put forward a question of is there confidence in our town council? And so lo and behold, 99% of the population of that group said no. And all of this, in a sense, it's meaningless in one way, and the town council treated it as exactly that. But it's not meaningless in, of course, the local papers noticed, the people noticed, so it raised the whole state. The town council completely ignored it. They also, you have a legal right to record meetings, including filming them now. And so they started going to meetings, and then so they got some great bits of film of, so when this was raised, of like, what do you have any views on the fact that, the good people of Portishead have no confidence in you? The mayor said something along the lines of, I think democracy is massively overrated, which was then recorded, which was very, quite useful to be able to stick out on tweets or whatever. So they built up a campaign over a period of time, and they chose their candidates quite early, and then their candidates started going to things, so they suddenly started existing, and they had a presence. So come the election, they won every seat with a completely ridiculous majority, and they got some people onto the next level up, because some of them they thought, well, why not? Because there was a district election at the same time. And I've always said that's a waste of time. This methodology works at a parish and town level, because effectively you're selling individuals. A bit like Jill was just saying, everybody knows everybody. So part of what I'm saying on your doorstep is, hello, I'm Peter. My children go to the same school as yours, or I'm a governor at St. John's, and whatever it might be. So people know each other. Whereas the next level up, you don't get that. But actually, what Portishead said, they got enough people on. I think it's 3 or 4 onto the district, and they're now part of a rainbow coalition. So it's essentially a coalition of everybody but the Tories. So they're actually in power, and they're part of the cabinet at the district level, and that's true in 3 or 4 other places as well now. So I've had to eat my hat a number of times in that respect. I mean, because it's kind of like, you won't get a majority at a district level, I don't think. But, as I say, it has now been done. There's a woman in the cabinet of Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch, who holds the climate change portfolio, who came from nowhere. So it's kind of like, there is a great range, and the opposite end of the range from Portishead's long approach was in Monmouth, where I was approached by somebody who said, would you come and talk to us? Effectively, would I come and talk as you've asked me, kind of thing. A bit different because it was very much geared towards an election. And I said, yes, I can, but you do realise I haven't got this, I may be wrong about this, but I think you will need to register your candidates like 2 days after we meet. So in other words, it's like, this is, are you sure about this? And she said, yep. And so I thought, well, I better go then. And so so I went, and at 7 o'clock, there were about 6 people in the room, and I thought, what am I going to say to not embarrass them? And then by kickoff, the whole room was full. They had a whole load of candidates by the end of the meeting, and then stood. But they went really late, and that's the latest one. So there's lots of different tactics. But the advantage of that is, of course, nobody sees it coming, because you don't exist until you suddenly turn up on the ballot paper. The Portishead method gave the opposition, 18 months to try and slag them off, but they were so well sorted in what they did that it didn't matter in that way. So I mean, yes, there's a great range of different things, and some lots of different ways of working, as we call them, and others call them different things, but different tweaks of that as to what your ethos is and how you want to behave together.
Okay, yeah, that's great. I think somebody had Adam. You've got your hand up. Would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, although most of it was answered in that last response, actually. So I live in a city. So my question was, is this possible at any tier higher than town council level? And you've sort of answered that, really. I suppose, having spent a bit of time in town and city and council meetings, which I'll never get back, sadly. It's having 3 or 4 seats of, say, 60 is obviously not as effective as sweeping a council like you did in Frome. Do you just rule out the idea of getting a majority within a city? So I live in Hull. I love the idea. I've got both books, and I circulate them to many of my friends in the hope that it'll take off here. And and I've been interviewing. I use that word loosely. People and community leaders within Hull to try and build a bit of sort of tacit approval of the idea to maybe grow some fertile ground that it could grow from. Am I flogging a dead horse, I suppose, is my question.
No, yes and no. So in Hull, you'll have Metropolitan Council, or I don't know what they'll be called, but you'll have some level of representation of wards with, and your representation will be terrible. There'll be sort of 20, 30,000 people electing. Well, I don't know if it'll be, but it'll be awful. It'll be some of the worst in Europe, actually.
Yes.
But what you can, but under the Localism Act, which I slagged off a few minutes ago, you have the right to form a parish council within Hull. And I was just, I'm not a woman. I can't do 2 things at once. So I can't look this up. But if you look up Nauk New, I have. I started doing it. Nauk New Parish Councils. Anyway, so the National Association of Local Councils publish how to do this. And again, you actually need very few people. What you do is you form an area, which doesn't have to be based on an existing ward. You say, okay, here's this lump of people, and you have to get a certain percentage of the population, the voting population, who say we would like a parish council. It's not many. It's something like 7%. That's in the NAUC document. So it's not necessarily a lot. If that number of people say that they want a parish council, then it goes, then that process starts to put that in place. There's a huge flaw in this, though, which is that it's the next level up who make that decision. So if Hull City Council are absolutely against this, then they can stop it from happening, if it's Hull City. But in many cases they're not, because for them it's like, well, why not? Because this council will take on roles that we can't do, and we haven't got the capacity. So there's one in London which is very effective, called Queen's Park. And there are 5 or 6 in process in London, and I can't remember how many others. But I mean, that's the only way to get in at this level. But I think it's well worth doing in many ways, partly because it engenders a level of democracy. It forces people to talk to each other. It gets people, not least, to realize how unrepresented they are. When they suddenly realize how crap the system is, and that actually there may be other ways that are better. So it's like, that's a bit of a yes and no answer. So, I mean, I'm afraid that in a city, that's the only way you can get this level of operation. But otherwise, I don't think it works. I don't think it works, because if you're standing in, one of the areas in Hull, they'll have a bloody great budget of millions of quid, and they'll be doing things like, let's say, education or building bridges. No, you don't want another bridge. Whatever it is, there'll be some huge. So if I knock on your door and say, what are you going to do about education? And you say, well, I don't know, mate. I'm going to ask experts. You're going to go, nah, you're a closet Marxist. I'm not voting for you. So you have to have a manifesto. So I think, or you've got to have some sort of broad manifesto. Otherwise, it's kind of really difficult to just stand as, I'll ask the people, because, well, what if you don't? Unless you've got that personal trust, will people really, really believe you? Anyway, the other model, sorry, I'll just say this really quickly, because the guy doing this in Swansea, which is really interesting. So Swansea is obviously a big city, unitary council, and what they're doing is they're forming political parties in each ward. So the one I'm thinking of, what's it called? Uplands, I think. So they formed an Uplands political party, and in Uplands there are only 4 ward councillors, and they've taken 2 of those from Labour for the first time ever. So now they've got 2 of the Uplands little tiny ward. There are only 2 in the whole of 70 people in Swansea, but they really represent Uplands. And when issues around Uplands come up in the big council meeting, they get 40, 50 people to come to the public gallery. So, they've got real backing. So they're having a real impact. And then the plan, as I understand it, is to then do the same thing in other wards. So you might form I don't know what the names are, but an Uplands, a Westlands, a Lowlands, and then they can form some sort of coalition. So you become an independent party made up of little bits, which I thought, I'd only just met that, and I thought, oh, that's really clever. Because otherwise you're up against the might of the political parties, and they don't like it. They don't like it up them.
Thank you. That was great.
Brilliant. Thank you. So Ian, have you got a question that you'd like to ask Peter? Can I ask you to unmute, or shall I ask it for you?
No, I think is that okay?
Yeah, can hear you. Thank you.
Peter, do you know if there are any Derbyshire towns that have followed the model, and if so, how have they been received by the likes of Derbyshire County Council?
I definitely don't know the last bit. Neil is in this meeting. Neil, have you got your spreadsheet nearby by any chance?
Peter, yes, I read the question and I looked in the database, and the answer is there isn't anybody else in Derbyshire. The only mention of Derbyshire is you guys.
Because of this meeting, thanks. So yes. Neil's been helping me I had an incredibly unsorted list on an Excel spreadsheet, and Neil's been helping me to sort that out, and added the where places are. There are many, but there's lots I don't know. I mean, in that 2019 elections, there were a number of people who just got in touch and sent me a picture of them in the pub saying, bought your book. We now run Haswell's Community, which is north of you somewhere. Thank you very much. One in New Zealand, and so the trouble about releasing books into Amazon and the world of bookshops is that I don't know where places are really, but we're trying to build that up and get a better coverage, a better understanding of what's going on. And then there is also the fact that just because somebody's bought the book and runs the council, it doesn't mean they're any good. I mean, I hate to say that. I mean, they may be a bunch of interesting and different individuals, but maybe they unseated a lot of party people who were doing a really great job, or people who were doing a good job. So yeah, anyway, we've got a database with quite a lot of places on it, but no Derbyshire's, I'm afraid.
Oh, well. We should change that. Jill, have you got another question you'd like to ask? Sorry.
Only if there's nobody else with their hand up. Does anybody else want to come in?
Wave. Can't see any more waving, so go for it.
Rosemary, did you not want to come in?
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry,
Rosemary?
I can't hear you.
No, I'm fine.
Oh, okay. I can't remember what my question was. I wrote it down. Oh, yeah. Peter, what happens then when you're talking about democratic decision making? So the populace sit and talk with you about what's really important to them. What happens though when you find that your neighbours come up with policies you find it really difficult to approve of? So, and you don't want to implement. So people are really keen on, the example that bugs me is close mowing of grass verges all over the place, and of playing fields right up to the boundary. What do you therefore think is the right principle to apply? Because as an environmentalist, that's not the way you would choose to go, but discussing with people that you haven't changed their mind, you haven't persuaded them, they still want everything tidy.
So you mean that on a quite a micro level? You mean if you're...
That's what, yeah, that's parish parish council responsibility here. We've got a lot of land and a lot of it, playing fields and verges and all sorts of land here. That is the responsibility of different tiers of local authority manage them. We're still not quite sure who manages what. But if, for example, you find that the populace really don't like these shaggy verges along the side of the road to school, they want it all tidy and neat. I mean, I'm just pulling that one out as an example.
Yeah.
This is what people keep saying, and you haven't persuaded them, for all the reasons you and I might agree on. You haven't persuaded them that it's not a good policy. They want the verges mown. I'm using that as my straw argument.
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. It's the problem with democracy, isn't it?
I know.
What if the people make the wrong decision?
Oh yeah, read your top bill. Yeah.
So, a lot of the way. Now, let me start from another slightly different point. Ultimately, the town councillors are responsible for making the decisions for things which are going on in the town. So they can't give decisions to the people where spending money is involved. In other words, you can't go out to the people and say, okay, we're going to put aside our powers for this, and you, the people, can decide whether to cut the grass or not. What you can do is you can have some sort of process where you're going out to the people, which might be some sort of public meeting or different ways of doing things. And I'll talk about one in a moment, where you're saying, we are going out to you and we will listen to you, and we really want to hear what you're saying. And that's where the problem starts coming, in a sense, because if they say the wrong thing or the thing you don't want, what do you do about that? But you still do, ultimately, it is the councillors who need to make that decision. And so it's partly trying to ensure that you never ask questions. It's learning from Brexit, where you're not asking questions where you're going to get, where potentially you get an answer which is a total nightmare. So you're asking questions in a way which you're giving power, and you genuinely are. So I'm going to divert for a second, but I'll come back to the grass. The thing we mainly did around this was have two things. One was panels, where we took an area of strategy. So for instance, we said, we don't know anything about sport. So let's go out to the people and let them decide what the town's strategy on issues around sport should be. and we held meetings in the football club, the rugby club, and the cricket club. Loads of people came. 100 people came to each meeting. The bars are open, which you can't do in the town council. And then well orchestrated, well facilitated meetings with people making decisions at tables. If you said we're going to have 3 meetings, 2 hours each, so we're not going to take loads of your time. First, we sort of brainstorm of issues, then bringing them together in one way, and then telling us what we should do. And in those cases, and we did that for 5 different subjects, that was absolutely fantastic. I mean, what people really came up with really worked. And I think it goes back to trust the people, because we essentially trusted the people to recognize the things that we could and couldn't do. They didn't, tell us we needed to create, I don't know, ski slopes or things that were never going to happen. They understood the constraints under which they operated, or we were operating. And in the case of sport, everything was doable. And there were loads of new ideas which you had never hit the table before. And we as councillors definitely wouldn't have come up with. So there's a way of involving people in that way. And then the other way is that we said, this area of budget, 50,000 quid's worth of public events, you can decide. And we'll have a sort of Dragon's Den event in the football club. And you can all come along and vote. And whoever wins gets the money. We'd had there were a set of criteria that, that had to be fulfilled, that were about whether it was spent in the town and a few other things, but not much. And what was good about that was it really involved people in the making of the decisions, so they understood that, you could see people saying, oh, I like that one, I like that one, I like that one, and then kind of going, oh my God, I've spent all 50,000, I've still got 5 to go. So they had to go through that process of working out what to do, which is important. So it was helping to re-educate people in how to do things in that kind of way. But some of those decisions were not ones that I would have made. And the other thing to say about that is that we let 10-year-olds vote in that process, because we realized, because it's only advisory, because they're not making a decision. But some of those events were, let's say, there'll be loads of majorettes involved in, or, they were actually events which involved children. So of course they should be involved in making that decision. And then later incarnations of this, the schools got involved as well, and they were part of that too. So you're really involving a lot of people, but then, in my view, you then have to decide. You have to go with what they decide. So to give you an example, one of the things that people wanted to do was have public fireworks. That the town council would fund a firework display, which I was dead against personally, and I'd voted against and spoken against before we started doing this, when it was something that came up for us as a town council. The good people of Frome decided they wanted a firework event. It's more hat eating. It was really good, actually. It was great. It was a really, really good cross town event, in the sense of different groups of people coming to it, and it was hugely successful and popular and raised lots of money. In many ways, I was wrong. I mean, I still think environmentally and for pets, it's not a good idea. But so that you have to go with those things. Going back to the grass, I would have something like a citizens and jury. So you'd be asking people to be involved in a process, but in a way where you're bringing in expertise. So I don't know if you've ever been involved with citizens' assemblies, and the idea of a citizens' assembly, which brings a group of, in that case, randomly selected people, which I doubt you could afford to do, but you could still do it as a public meeting. But you bring this group of people together, and then they effectively have expert witnesses. It's a bit like what's that program on Radio 4? The God, I can't remember what it's called. Where you have some really difficult issue, and people
Moral Maze.
Moral Maze.
Could well be. Yeah, but you're bringing in expertise. So people get to hear the environmental arguments properly, not from angry councillor Jill Hume, but from expert environmentalist, somebody who you've seen on telly, and you also have the road traffic safety person saying, actually, you've got to be able to see around the corners, and then maybe that gets you to a point where you're going, okay, I've got this. We mow round the corners, and we leave a strip of a strip of for the animals. So for me, it's all about trying to bring people into making the decisions, and accepting that sometimes they will do things that you kind of don't like that much, but but that's fine. And you know, and it goes back to that point. I don't think I did actually say it, but it's like at this level, nobody dies. You know, it doesn't matter that much. You can take risk, and you can, you know, so you win some, you lose some, and but you won't kill anyone.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent. Okay, so any more? Has anybody got their? Oh, sorry, I've got two people with their hands up. Oh, there's Phil. I think Adam's still got his hand up. Is that another question, Adam, or is that just okay? Phil Fretcham, ask you to unmute.
Yeah, done that. Hi, Peter.
Hiya.
You've mentioned ways of working a few times this evening. Could you tell us a little bit about your ways of working and where they came from and why you felt that was important to have those as you work through this, please?
Sure. I think a number of us felt that the thing which we liked least about national politics was the sort of built-in conflict. The fact that, you know, it's going back to what I said before about, you know, the opposition having to oppose, even if the idea is a good one, kind of thing. But the fact that that then becomes very easily very personal, and it also very easily becomes a process of keeping grudges, where you know, if you defeat my proposal one week, I'll make bloody sure I defeat yours next week, even though it's a good idea, because I don't really care. All I'm trying to do is get back at you because you, you know. So there was this. We talked about this as being just so dysfunctional. And in a sense, not how a well-functioning family would run. You can disagree, and indeed we wanted to encourage disagreement and contradiction and discussion and all of those things, but not conflict, where it would lead to all that kind of thing. So the ways of working were I mean, they were originally a list of about 10. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find them in time. They're in some chapter or other in both books, actually, because I think they're really, really important. You know, so, but they are the kind of things that the principles of how you behave. I mean, they're about properly listening, so being able to really give time to listen to somebody else's point of view and being prepared to move to the other side, and as I say, particularly not bearing grudges. So it's that. I mean, that's really what's at the basis of them. There's half a dozen of them there, and as I say, other towns have introduced other ones. And actually, one of the best places to look at something similar is the Alternative Party in Denmark. The Alternative Party is the only national party that I know that's run in similar sort of way that I'm talking about, because they have a proportional representation system. So they have 14 different parties. So the Alternative Party started again with a very short run-in, and what they promised to do was to crowdsource their manifesto after they got in. And in that context, in a very liberal country, they got 12 MPs. But they have a set of, I think they call them core values, which are right. If you Google their alternative vet in Denmark, but you get it as Alternative Party, you get the things they said to do. A lot of it's around empathy. So it's about really trying to get into understanding why somebody else is making the point they are. And then we had some great examples of somebody starting from quite a strong position and then actually genuinely listening and then going, yeah, no, I can see what you're on about now. It's fine. You know, I'll leave it. I mean, but to me, it's what we do, you know, and that's part of what it goes back to what I was saying about it's not the individuals, it's the system so often that, you know, that people are obliged under our system to dislike each other and not get to know each other. And of course, there are plenty of examples of where that isn't true. And there are lots of great relationships between councillors of different parties and at national level, you know, people who have become great friends over the years. But it's just a nonsense, I think. But to get a group of people to work together for the common good, I think you have to realise that actually we agree about most things, I think. And even if you have no idea what your party politics or anything else, I've never seen you before, but I mean, you know, even if your national politics were hardcore UKIP or something, we felt completely differently about immigration or race or anything else. In terms of what we did in New Mills Council, none of that needs to come up. You know, as long as we stick to talking about the things that matter to New Mills, we're fine. And we can, as we get to know each other, we can take the piss out of each other in the pub later, or have those discussions later. But you know, the ways of working were about, let's not carry that into what we're doing for the town, because actually we mostly agree. It's a starting point.
You've I know your background was in what became a transition group. Did your work in that transition group inform the way that you wanted to work in any way? And if so, you know, were you taking on that transition work and then moving it into local politics? Is that kind of the plan?
Well, it wasn't the plan. So fascinatingly for me, there's a woman who's her PhD's just been completed, looking at exactly that. So what's the links? What were the links in Frome between the transition movement? There were 4 of us who'd come out of the transition movement into that first council. And I think a lot of that informality, so our transition meetings often started with something quite meaningful, in the sense that we'd have a bit of silence, a poem, something, you know, we were trying to, you know, connect in some ways. Yeah, so that sort of ethos, I suppose, carried forward into the councils particularly, and also that things should be fun. You know, I wasn't going to spend, I mean, I said I'd do this for 4 years, and if people elected me again, I'd do it for another 4. And I'm delighted that none of the first councillors are still councillors, because I don't think people should stay forever. So I was happy to put plenty in, but I wasn't going to go to all these meetings that were boring as hell. I mean, some of them are, and you can't get around a bit of discussion of health and safety, but we had a lot of fun, actually, in meetings as well as afterwards. And also we had regular annual, what we call party conferences, which was a joke really, because we're not a party, we were never a party, but we'd rent a cottage or rent somewhere and then go as a group for a long weekend, which we paid for as individuals. Partly to have fun, you know, and to go for a walk in some nice bit of Somerset, and to get to know each other, but also to work really hard on strategy and things, so that, you know, which I don't know of many parish councils who do that, but it meant we could be so much more effective, because we were really, well, you come to respect people, you know, because of, as I say, because of that, the communality that you have. You know, there's a guy I can think of who I've got nothing in common with politically, but our children went to the same college. You know, we have masses of things in common, and I would never have got the views of Conservative Frome without knowing him, which I do.
Can I ask Helen to unmute and ask her question?
Thanks, Penny. Hi, Peter. My name is Helen from Transition Bollington, and I'd like to ask about taking the conversation into schools. You know, transition's all about equipping younger people with the tools that they're going to need to deal with some of the legacies that's been left to them. So how would you recommend taking the Flatpack conversation into schools and engaging with young people?
Sure. So do you mean in the sense of education about, I was going to say about democracy. I hate talking about democracy because we haven't got one. But I mean, so is that what you mean about having proper discussion about representation and democracy and so on in schools?
Yeah, absolutely. About raising awareness. You know, a lot of young people sort of leave school and college with absolutely no idea about politics and the whole governance system. So how do we engage them and empower them really to take these sort of measures and to have the confidence to believe that they can be part of that system?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I don't think in the 2 councils I was part of, I don't think we did it particularly well. We took part in events at schools wherever possible, so all councillors did, but there was never a particular programme to do so that I can think of. one of the mayor before me was 21, so he had still had people in. There's only one college in school, the final college, so he went to school with some of the people at the school. So when he went back to talk to them, it's a good point. I mean, it must be part. One of your colleagues has just stuck in the chat. Great topic for PSHE. I'm sure you're right. I think that's something which I don't know enough about, and we should be doing more of. I don't know what schools and government thinks when you present something, when you're basically saying this system is totally dysfunctional in schools. I'm not sure how well that goes down, but I mean that's what needs saying, isn't it? Because it is. It's like, you know, it's absolutely insane that we're allowing a situation like this, where 2% of people, as I say, are members of political parties. How come all of us, the 98%, have cheerfully given away our power to create manifestos to 2% of the population, and then a tiny number rule? You know, we're complicit in this, really.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just looking at some of the faces on the call. I'm sorry I can't put my camera on this evening, but I can't see anyone, that's sort of college, university age on the call. I just, it's quite sad that, we're not engaging.
Yeah, it is. And I don't have answers. I wish I did.
Thank you. Did you get students from Frome that were, coming to meetings, young people?
So very early on, we thought, let's crack this by having a youth mayor. So this is a bit which probably ought to be off record in a sense, but I don't mind. So what happened was that the college put forward somebody who was elected as a youth mayor, who was completely lovely. And there was a deputy youth mayor who was also, he was great. And they came to more meetings than half the councillors. They were brilliant. But what they became in many ways was like us, and they were quite formal. I mean, I wanted to have my naivety. I thought that they might bring a different way of doing things and help to radicalize the council and make it more anarchic and different and so on. But that didn't happen. And then we changed from that to running a conference, an annual schools conference, which is what went into the voting process. And so there is engagement in that way. But it's not really what you're talking about. I mean, our system is so hopeless that I don't quite know how you'd get into it. I mean, no doubt the curriculum tells you to teach the hopeless system. So I don't know how you get around that.
Interesting. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Peter. Can I come to Kevin O'Brien?
Yeah, thanks, Penny. Hello, Peter.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi there, okay. If we have I'm not talking from personal experience necessarily here, if we have a team of independents that were elected and fundamentally make a hash of it over a 4 or 5 year term, effectively they're returning the baton to the mainstream political parties in a way, despite 98% of us not being members. But through the actions of the independents then, who basically let the side down, how difficult do you think it is to overturn public opinion from that point on?
Yeah, it's really problematic, isn't it? Once you've got a bunch of independents who, and I hinted at this earlier, didn't I, when I said, you won't, it's not all utopia once you've got that group of independents in there. And there have been a number of cases where people have, I don't know, well, actually the two which are most interesting that I can think of are where individuals have essentially discovered their ego. Having been elected, they've suddenly gone, whoa, power. And then and then all the ways of working and all everything else goes out the window, and it's like, oh my God, where did that come from? And well, people, I don't know, and it's harder to be independent, the real independence for wherever, isn't it? I mean, you see what I mean. So if you've got independence for Frome, and then next election, and they've done a terrible job, and then another bunch come along who go, well, hang on a minute, they've done a terrible job with it's whatever that Monty Python sketch is, isn't it? And I don't know. It's really problematic. Other than, I suppose, to try and highlight where they haven't done what they said in that way. I mean, if they did start off by saying, we have a set of principles which we will stick to, and then they clearly haven't, then I guess, then individuals can come forward and put that forward. And then hopefully new people might stand within that group and possibly be better, better overthrown from inside than outside. I think a counter revolution with another bunch of independents is going to be really tricky. But coming up from inside in a sense and saying, this is not what should be going on, might work better.
I suppose coming back on that though is probably wrong, but is that down to a lack of experience in the initial stages, do you think?
It could well be, and that's certainly been the case with some of them, the others which I've mentioned that have collapsed. Often, I have to say, places which have had late revolutions. So they haven't really thought this through. They haven't really got a good ways of working. They haven't done what Portishead did of forming a really tight group. They haven't been, they haven't been drinking for 6 months. No, they don't necessarily need to drink. They haven't formed a relationship between that group of people and decided what they're going to do if they take power. It's suddenly, oh my God, we'd run the council. And at that point, that's where the egos and everything else, in the case I'm thinking of, have crashed in, because they're already in those positions. And if there are others who want to manipulate that, the councillors from before, party politicians who then persuade them to, give up their independence within the first few weeks, as it happened, or town clerks. Town clerks can be a significant challenge in this whole process, because if they've been around for a long, long time, well, even if they haven't, I suppose, but they can be very powerful. And if you're new to this whole game and the town clerk is at your elbow saying, my advice to you is not to do that, and you're the chair, it takes a lot of courage to kind of go, oh, I think I'm going to do this, because you don't know where you stand legally. So town clerks can be a really big issue, and there's a whole chunk of thoughts I have on town clerks, which I probably would need to turn recording off. Anyway, I'm not sure that's very helpful, but it's nice to see you.
Yeah, and you too. Thank you.
Interesting. Yeah. So, well, we can turn the recording off or something. Is there anybody else that's got a question? Is that Rick with his hand up? No, Rick.
Yes. Yeah. I was just going to ask you about the town clerks actually, because I can foresee that's a big problem in all of this, because you've got your elected officers, you've got your council officers, and if the council officers are giving you advice not to do things that you want to do, that's a problem. And even if you are allowed to do them, they don't want to implement those decisions, then that's another big problem. And I just wondered, going back to the beginning of what you were speaking about when you said you'd paid a facilitator, I just wondered whether there was any kind of issues with council officers saying, no, we don't want you to do this, or we don't want you to do any other things that you wanted to do, or you can't spend this money.
Sure. So the facilitation was entirely us as independents for Frome, so that's outside the council. And I know that gets muddied a bit or muddled when all 17 of independents for Frome are the councillors, but we as independents for Frome are commissioning that person. So it's got nothing to do with the council in that case. You see what I mean? So it's a bit separate in that way. One of the ways I'm hoping we can get around this is increased networking between councils who are operating in this way, to support people who want to stand councillors in this kind of way, or groups. And I've run for some time a group of about 200 people who of 200 councillor people who have been elected, and included in that are 2 town clerks who are also in that group. So this is a closed Facebook group, and they're really useful. So I mean, so what we're getting is a degree of mentoring and sharing of ideas, and quite a bit of that is our town clerk says this. Are they right? then you get a whole wodge of answers of people going, no, I don't think they are actually, or try this, or refer them to this. It's a later act. Because many town clerks have been around for a long time and aren't particularly up to date. I mean, again, it's not their fault necessarily. Their training's crap. Many of them cover, you know, a lot of councils, so they have a tricky job, and some of the people they have to work with are blooming difficult. So it's not a job I'd want, but you know, so that's been really helpful. And I suspect that you know, we may end up, you know, offering advice in a, oh, I don't know how we do this, but I mean, there may be some way where we end up, you know, slightly formalizing that sort of situation. So we're much more able to support people in the situations we're talking about. There's a National Association of Local Councils, which is meant to do this. That's what it says it does. But in my view, it's, I mean, well, what it mostly seems to do is to prepare pay scales for town clerks and do much more formal things and lobby government to try and get more money for local councils, which is perfectly worthwhile. But it doesn't really support, I don't think, you know, the kind of people we're talking about who are, you know, trying to challenge the system and really trying to make things happen in whatever their little town is. And you've got a town clerk who really doesn't want to change from what they've always done because it's going to be more work. So it can be a real challenge. And there are some fantastic town clerks who are really up for this, and some who I've sort of seen breathe a huge sigh of relief when a new bunch of young women comes in to run the show and really stir things up and do the things they've been dying to say for years. So, you know, I only say a bunch of new women because there's 5 towns down in Devon where that's been largely what's happened, where a bunch of much younger, largely women have got in and really, you know, stirred things up and got things going in a way that's very impressive.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting.
Can I come to Liz? Liz got their hand up. Mute.
That's right. You said at the beginning that you saw a lot of the councillors as being middle-aged white men. Now, you've just said that you had a lot of women, but I was wondering about diversity in general. Now you've got quite a lot of councillors throughout the country. Do you think that in terms of ethnicity or other things, you are reflective of their communities?
I think in general, definitely not. And it's a really key issue which needs addressing. I mean, parish and town councils are mostly rural, and rural areas are less likely to have significant ethnic populations. Of course, that's not always true, and there will be larger towns where it's definitely not true. But yeah, it's another key issue to address, and in some parts of the town, it's definitely the case. It's back to that, you know, why would you join this club of old white men? You know, and so it's finding ways that make the role much more interesting and lighter and in plain English. If I couldn't see New Mills's agendas because they don't seem to be on your the minutes because they're not on the website for some reason. But when you look at the agendas and minutes of most town councils, you know, they're in Victorian English. They're completely incomprehensible. Which of course is how much of the power is held by clerks and councillors who've been there forever because they understand the language. But you never go to one of those meetings. It's all in gobbledygook, but it doesn't have to be like that. Because, for instance, you can translate the whole lot into English and stick it on your new Facebook site if you like. You know, and there's no legislation that stops you doing that. You don't have to wait 3 months for it to be signed off. You can have some phrase which says something like, you know, well, you can say, here's a plain English summary of my take on you know, on the town on tonight's town council meeting, or on, you know, and so you can there's nothing to stop you doing things like that and get around because the legislation is so far behind, you know, what's necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you. A few people saying thank you very much, and
yeah.
there anybody else with their hands up? Any questions? Phil's got his hand up, I think. That's over to Phil, please. Oh, it's two people. Oh, yeah, Phil.
Do you have a vision of where this, or where you would like this to go, Peter? Is there a kind of, do you lie in bed at night and think, wouldn't it be great if this happened? And if so, what is that? How far can this go?
So the good news is I don't lie in bed at night and think about it, but I do think about it. And the answer is, I want all 10,000 parish and town councils to be functioning, to be well-functioning councils which catalyse support and activity in their community. So they're doing things the other way around. They're running participatory, not representative democracy. But what's behind that really, Phil, is that I think that if you ask the people, they will want to do the right things environmentally. I think that one of the things that's come out of this period, certainly in Frome, is that people have really enjoyed walking more, bicycling more, not having pollution, not having noise, hearing of birds, all of this stuff, and that could be a catalyst into people going, actually, we don't want to be doing all this stuff. I mean, and if you give power out to the people, they will do things which aren't poisoning the air and their children and giving them asthma and all of this kind of stuff. You don't have to call it the Green Party, and you don't have to turn it into party politics. So my dream, or if I were to lie awake at night, it would be all of those councils, doing politics in that kind of way, because I think then the higher levels of government would listen, because that's a lot of people, that's a lot of representation, and you'd be a brave central government which went into an election ignoring that. If all 10,000 linked together were kind of saying, actually, we want to move away from carbon fuels, we want to ban fracking forever, kind of thing, would you really risk that? And go, well, we're going to carry on fracking because we want to? I doubt it. So it's massively naive, my dream, but that's the answer.
Wow, okay. So has anybody else got a question? Don't see any hands up, but I think that would be a very fitting place to end a dream of what this could turn into, I think, and how what's happening at a local level could potentially influence further up the line. So I think I've not missed anybody. I do apologise if there are hands up and I've missed, but I just want to say a massive thank you. If there's anything that Peter wants to add to the end of anything,
not really. You can reach me through Flatpack Democracy. Google that, and you'll get to the website where the books are, and then you can get me through that if you want to. And I've just downloaded the chat, so I'll have a look through that. I think you cleverly covered most of the questions within that, but I'll have a look later and see if there's anything, and then I can come back. I've got your email. I can come back through you if there's anything there. And I'm really happy. We're really happy to talk to anyone who wants to take any of this further. And actually also who has ideas about what support we could and should be offering, even if it's not relevant to you in New Mills or to wherever you live. If you're thinking, well, actually what would be really good is to have a 3-minute video on this, or so at this point it would be really useful for the Flatpack Democracy campaign of if you've got ideas about what we could and should be offering, that would be great. But it's been really nice to see. It's really nice to see so many people. Good for you for getting this many out on a whatever night of the week it is.
I'm in. I'm in out. Peter, that's been so exciting. Did you know that the Plain English campaign is centred in New Mills?
I did not.
It is one of our local homegrown industries. I just thought that would amuse you.
Yeah, great. It does. I need them. Good. Thank you for that.
Oh, that was great talk. Thank you very, very much.
Great pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Really appreciate that. And like Peter says, if you want to get in touch, you can get in touch from the website, or contact us, and I can put you in touch as well. But but I think everybody's extremely enthused by listening to you tonight, Peter, and I totally understand why my sister-in-law and her partner moved down to Frome now. I think it's an exciting place to be. Excellent. Okay. If anybody wants to leave, that'd be great. I'll stop recording now. But if anybody wants to ask any private questions, then you can please hang on if you'd like. Thank you.
Good.
Everybody.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Good night.
A couple of weeks' time, we've got another cafe transition. So